Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet. My name is Katana Malinowski, and I am the host of Transformational Art with Katana, making the unmanageable manageable. Welcome. I'm here today with my beautiful friend, Dan McPherson, who is a professional speaker and podcast host, business and professional development coach, and founder and CEO of Leaders Must Lead. Thank you for being here with me today, Dan.
Oh, thank you for having me. I am happy to be here and to connect with people wherever they may be. I love it.
Fantastic. So, the first question I have for you today is, who are you as a person?
I am Dan. And I say that as the simplest answer because for maybe 40 years, I couldn't answer it that way. And probably for 47 and a half of my 48 years, I couldn't. And I have a passion to live authentically and not in some farcical, fluffy way that so many people describe it, but to live myself as I truly am, to get to this space where not only am I comfortable in my own skin, but I found my personal resonance in the world and things are able to flow to me instead of me fighting through them. And so I'm Dan. Now to where I think your question might go is that I have a heart of service. My core belief in the world is that people matter most and relationships are everything. And I do a lot to represent that, to connect that to my soul and to my other core beliefs. And I am passionate about the mission of inspiring true generational change in the world that reduces human trafficking, hunger, poverty, and racism by 15% worldwide in the next 15 years, as well as helping to prevent suicide in the world. So there's a few nuggets to throw out there to begin with.
Wow, that's beautiful. I think it's so important to be authentic because, like, as you were saying, there is so much fluff out there, and people are really trying to fit into somebody's category so that they can find acceptance. Would you find that to be true?
I think that it's true in many ways. I think though that people fit into these other categories or come across as plastic for lots of different reasons. I think back even to when I began my business 6 years ago, and I did these videos that are on my Facebook page for my business. Don't go look at them, no need to. But the content was really good, but the messenger, the vibe was off. And it was because I was trying to be what I thought I should be. It wasn't even trying to be someone else, although that happens as well. But I was trying to be what I thought I should be or what I thought I could be instead of just being. And I think there's a lot of work to do to get to a spot where we're comfortable just being, not being wistful or wishful, not thinking about other things, not thinking, I wish I was this, but rather being present and existing in the space where we are. And it goes well beyond just trying to be what we think someone else wants us to be or fitting into a group.
Beautiful. Yes. So growing up, what did you want to become?
Well, I wanted to be, I suppose flippantly, I wanted to be not poor. I wanted to get past the struggles that I had felt and what I perceived as successful. From a career standpoint, I wanted to be a public speaking evangelist or I wanted to be an attorney. Those were the two that were most likely depending upon the time. And from a just a life standpoint, I always had a strong desire to help people.
Hmm. Yeah, that resonates with me. I can remember being 4 years old and having that thought that
Yeah.
I wanted to take the world and hug it, and make everything better. Um, it's an interesting place that we come to. I know that as a youngster that I changed my mind several times because they always asked us these questions in school.
Right.
What do you want to be when you grow up? How many times do you think you changed your mind?
um, I didn't.
You
What
didn't?
I just described is what I held to for a very long time. I suppose at some point I also wanted to be an author, but that wasn't in place of these other things. It was I can write, I can do these things, and there was a component of that pushed in. But much like I had a crush on the same girl from middle of third grade all the way through near the end of high school. Shout out to my friend Phyllis. I stuck with something. Once I saw it pretty clearly, and I wanted that, and I lived to that. I never wanted to be a doctor. I never really wanted to be an astronaut. Don't get me wrong. If I could have went into a sci-fi universe, would I want to be the hero that with the laser pistol and making Law and Order in a cool way and Adventures in a Far Off Galaxy? Sure, but that didn't feel like it was likely. So I stuck with the attorney and all the rest.
Wow, that's fantastic. So what led you to being on the path that you are on today?
That is a complicated answer, and you've heard my story, so I'll share a bit of it because it's really my story from when I was young that put me on the path that I'm on now. It just took me 25 years to figure it out. So I was a slow learner, let's be honest. When I was younger, when I was little, I was 2 years old, I was hidden from my father for 6 years. And my mother took me out of that situation. Unfortunately, we ended up in a separate abusive situation. And that gentleman came home one night and threatened us. He left. He said, "I'll be back in 2 hours. And if you're here when I get back, I'll kill you." So we got rescued out of that. And I went and lived with my mother. She was selling herself so that we had rent. We struggled. I was reconnected with my dad in that time, which was okay. And then my mother got remarried, and I was exposed to a lot of different things, violence and drugs and all different sorts of crazy stuff. And it's not to say that my childhood was bad. And you may, some people may pull back thinking like, holy mackerel, that's a little crazy. It is, but there were plenty of good places in there as well. At the same point, I struggled so much more even than my close friends realized. And at the age of 16, things changed for me. That's when I survived my first suicide attempt. And it's also the first of what I would call my inflection points. I believe that we all get inflection points, about 4 to 8 of them across our life. That was the first one for me, because coming out of that, I had 2 lessons that really have driven me to where I am today. The first is that our environment, where we are, who we are around, that has influence. Of course it does, but that it's our choices that truly create change. It's the first time I felt the possibility of agency, and I began to get myself out of there as one of my first steps. The second was that I felt that I was meant to make a huge impact, to help a lot of people. And I felt that at a deep core level, but everyone shouted it down. Everyone said, no, that's just a high school dream. That's not going to happen. That's just ridiculous. And so I didn't really shove it down, but it kind of got closed off. And so then I went forward and burned forward from there. And I'll pause. I can tell you that's the genesis of everything that's now. There were a couple more steps on that path, and I'm glad to dive in wherever you would like.
Well, it's, what I'm looking for is to, how you got to your superpower and then into the business that you're working in today.
Fair enough. Well, then the next stage is pretty relevant then. So I had now this burning desire to help, but no outlet for it and no map for it and no path for it. I had this understanding that I could make choices, and it was the tiniest flicker of the beginning of an understanding of that. So I go off to college, which is what we do. And I was like, I will help. I was so driven, and I got 2 degrees in 4 years, and I ran some organizations, and I worked 40 hours a week most of the time. And I was like, I will do it. I had an option to potentially go to law school. I said no, because I realized I wasn't going to pay the price of the behind the scenes work. I wanted to do the thing right now. And so I picked the path that so many people with English and history degrees and no other options choose. And I went into sales. And I went into sales and I learned it very differently than others. I actually, that's not fair. I learned it initially the same as others. I learned all the manipulative tactics. I learned all the crazy things that when you think about sales make you go squick in your stomach. I learned that stuff in my first few months, and I lost money because I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I didn't want to do that. But then I learned a different way, and I learned how to serve people. And to this day, I teach sales in a very different way than anyone that I know. And I then started to really understand, and I began to be able to help people. So my next year, I made six figures as a early 20s, newly married kid. I threw it all away. I didn't do anything good with it, but I got to where I made it, and everybody around me started to think, oh, you're there, you've got it. But I felt unhappy. I felt like I'm not helping enough people. And so I gave it all up to go into sales management. And then I was like, I gave up probably, I went from what would have been $250,000 a year to 40,000 a year. And I said, I'll do sales management. And I helped hundreds of people make six figures. And then I was like, no, I'm doing really well, but I'm going to give that up. And I'm going to go into real leadership because I have to help more people. And then I went and I became a district manager, a regional director in retail. I ended up managing thousands of people and hundreds of millions in business, and still felt this burden that I wasn't helping enough people or in the way that I was supposed to. And 6 years ago, I got to a spot where I felt just unfulfilled. I felt lost. I felt like, what am I even doing? And I also had this thing settle in my stomach that told me that you either have to do something that gets you there, or you have to admit that you're never going to. And I don't have 1% of admit that I'm not going to in me. And so that's when I waited until my boss flew in to offer me my third promotion in 5 years. And I sat back and I looked at them, and I remember this moment so clearly, sitting at the table in the airport. And I looked at them and I said, what would it look like if I declined? And the shock on their face was pretty significant. Maybe it shouldn't have been, but it was. And they're like, are you quitting? And I'm like, let's talk about that. And the answer was yes. And I then jumped off the cliff, giving up hundreds of thousands a year of income to go to zero with no other money in the home to start my business, Leaders Must Lead. And to be fair, that's when my adventure actually began.
Wow. Yeah. And it leads me to ask, and it's a rhetorical ask, but how many people out there have that burning question or that feeling that there's so much more they want to do, and they're so afraid to take that next step?
All of us, right?
Right? I would venture.
We all do. Now, it's to varying degrees. Some people do find their spot and they say, I'm happy. Far more people find a spot where they're comfortable, and the unease or the unrest doesn't build to the level that it gets them over the hump. People ask me, Dan, when should I jump out and start my own company? When should I write a book? When should I do a podcast? And my answer is the same in every case: when you can't not do it.
That's a good answer. Yeah, I found myself in that same position, that no matter what I was doing to earn money, it wasn't satisfying, and it wasn't fulfilling whatever my heart was calling me to do.
Right.
And fortunate for me, I didn't have to take this big leap off of something that most people out here would never want to give up, which it strikes me because so many people want what you had.
Right. And I did, by the way. I spent my life earning this and never seeing the pattern that every time I earned it, I gave it up. And then having people tell me, oh, that's a pattern where you can't handle success, and not realizing that that wasn't the case. That wasn't actually the problem. But yes, several times I had what people dream of. I had what I dreamed of. I should also note, because I think it's really important that you're calling this out, that you're calling out and saying, hey, look, that not everybody's going to get to that spot where they should jump off the cliff. Not everybody should. The vast majority of people should not do what I did. in the way that I did it. And I want to be clear about that distinction. If you have a dream, my podcast is titled Dreams Are Real. My group that I host is titled Dreams Are Real. One of the main messages I bring in, the two main messages I bring into the world are there is always light through the darkness and dreams are always real. And that's important. We get our dreams when we're a little kid and they're big and they're expansive and they're exciting. And then as we progressively get older, they get stifled and dampened and crushed down. And I believe we do need to uncover them. We do need to take steps for them, but a step for them, it could be a side gig. It could be one step that takes you forward. That jumping out on your own and doing your whole thing. It's not for everybody because the vast majority of people are more entrepreneurial than they are entrepreneurs. And that's an incredibly important revelation. And the second is most of them don't require it. So do your dream, but do your dream in the way that suits you. And yours doesn't have to be as big as anyone else's or as small as anyone else's. Yours just has to be yours.
I like that. I was thrust into the decision by COVID. Mm-hmm. So I lost everything I had, which wasn't a lot, but it was a comfort zone. It was something that I was familiar with.
Right.
It was something I could do and I could explain easily to people. And then COVID hit and I lost everything. I lost 3 businesses. I lost the nonprofit I was building. I lost family, house, car, everything. And
so hard. That's so tough. I'm so sorry.
And thank you. But I also see it as a blessing because in that process, I found myself. I found my purpose, my process, and was able to make a decision because I was receiving the pandemic unemployment assistance.
Right.
And I knew it had a date of expiration.
Right.
And of course, I had no idea what this was going to look like at the end of it. I had been trying to get jobs and nobody was hiring, or at least my answers were, we really love your resume. We really love what you have to offer, but we're going to move on with a different candidate.
Right.
So I had to invent, okay, what am I going to do? I had to
create you had to figure out, who am I? Right. Yeah.
And that was how my transformational art and wellness strategist business was born. I put the investment in myself and I put the investment in my time and I took that leap. So we both took leaps in a different way, but for the same purpose.
Right. And it's important to understand we're all going to take a leap. The leaps just look different depending on who you are. The timing will be different. The situation will be different. How high it might look to the above the ground to someone else might be different. And I say that because we all have our own struggles, just like we all have our own stories. One of the things I've learned from doing the podcast that I have where we tell these deep stories is that everybody has a story. Whether it be the person next door or the person on stage in front of millions, everybody has a powerful story and everybody has a challenge and everybody grew up facing challenges that were very real and very powerful to them. And it's never about a comparison. It's about our own process and our own situation. And that becomes so important because I think there are those that get shamed because they didn't struggle enough or because someone else decides they didn't struggle enough. And that is heartbreaking to see and feel.
It is heartbreaking. And I really appreciate that you brought that up because that's what my business really focuses on is that, I work with professionals over 40. These are people that are overwhelmed. These are people that are dealing with health issues. These are people that can't maintain focus. They've got the irritability. They're struggling in their finances in every way, shape, or form because of all these stressors and traumas. And that looks different to everybody. Mm-hmm. And I'm helping them produce their story in order to reclaim their power so they can find that joy, find the peace, and thrive in their lives.
It's so important. And for me, I believe passionately that our story is the only unique thing we have, that it is by far the most powerful thing we have. And to the work that both you and I are doing, that when we share the good and the bad, we can help people. But when we share the ugly is when we transform lives. And again, for each of us, the what is quote unquote ugly is going to differ dramatically. I have had people cry as they shared something that to others might look seemingly small, but it held them back for their whole life. And I've had others who share these really deep, powerful stories that aren't actually that connected for them, that weren't in their mind the same type of struggle. And I will tell you that each person in their unique story has their unique place and their unique power. And I love that you're bringing that out, and I love to do the same.
Yes. And I love that it helps others when they hear all of the stories to recognize that we're out here creating a safe, judgment-free space
Yep.
for them to be able to share their stories, to heal themselves and to make them stronger and move forward.
It's interesting because I when I think of a judgment-free space, the only person whose judgment matters is the one telling, to a large degree. And I think we're the ones who get on our own way, right? Ego is the biggest impediment to our own success. And when we tell our story, we're the one judging us. And so if we create a judgment-free zone, it's about helping us not judge us and then share the stuff.
Exactly. Well, this is perfect because I was curious as to your thoughts on how important is it for creatives and entrepreneurs to be in control of their emotions?
That depends upon how you define be in control of, right? I believe that it is important to have, recognize, and be willing to sit in at the appropriate time our emotions. I also believe that if we are controlled by our emotions, that's a problem. And it creates issues. In general, I like to make decisions based upon data, not emotion. I teach people how to, the biggest things that I really teach people is how to do two things. One is find your calm, and the other is understand with clarity your next steps. All of us want those two things. We want the ability to step out of the overwhelm, out of the anxiety, out of the stress, and be calm, and then understand and see clearly, what do I do now? And you cannot do that if you're controlled by your emotions. But emotions have a valuable place. They're critical. And those who are divorced from their emotions end up becoming, we use the term very I don't know, loosely around, but end up becoming robotic in the wrong ways and become divorced from it and make this clinical, almost sociopathic plan for their lives, which is not good either. So I would say that it is important to understand them and to allow them to be in the right place, which sometimes at some points is roaming free, but not to be allow them to control everything that I do.
Fantastic. Yeah. I like to think of it as being aware. First, you got to have a willingness to recognize your emotions, then learning the awareness of the emotions and allowing them to move through you, giving them permission to be there, letting them move through you and not holding on to them. And then the power of choices.
Right. There's a trio of phrases that I share quite often that I think fits here. The first is awareness breeds improvement. Once we're aware, we can begin to improve. The second is decisions determine direction. So now I have the awareness, which often involves a lot of emotion, but it also involves reality and maybe a transition to objectivity. I get to this space of objectivity and goodness, where I recognize the emotions and the power of them. So I make decisions that determine what direction I'm going to go. And then the final of the three is that actions reflect priorities. And this is where you find out if your emotions and your data or logic are actually matched up, married up, aligned. Because if you are taking actions that do not reflect what you said your priorities are, then you've got to go back and revisit and figure out where the imbalance is. And that trio really helps to guide a lot of people because it reflects how we actually work.
Good point. Good point. So do you see the challenges that we all go through as gifts that are related to valuable lessons that are here for us?
I see that I see it maybe a little bit more objectively, in the sense that I believe that we're going to encounter the challenges. And I believe passionately, one of my other core beliefs is that life is 10% what happens and 90% how we respond to it. And I say frequently, why would I ever go to Vegas and bet my life on 10%? What that means is that what happens is in many ways far less relevant than the 90% where I'll always bet it, especially since I'm 100% in control of me. So I have complete control over this 90%. And that response is where my story is built. And so I believe that what I go through and how I choose to go through it allows me to connect with more people, to support more people, to find my path. But I don't know that I would go so much as to say that they're all gifts. I think that's a perfectly fine way of looking at it, but I would more say they're there, and us having the awareness to respond to them in a particular way is what gives us or allows us to create the gifts of moving forward. A simple example to this: about a year ago, I was laying on an operating table having had my first heart attack. I've since had more, but I was laying there on the operating table and I was talking to the doctors, and they had shared with me that 60% of people died from what I went through. And they said, "How are you feeling?" as we were getting ready to go do a procedure. And I said, "Look, I'm scared, but I'm primarily grateful." And they said, "Really, what's going on?" And I shared the 10% 90. And I said, there's a corollary that was driving into my soul at that point. And that is that in our darkest day, in our darkest hour, 90% of the things in our life are objectively good. Even in that moment, as I was being wheeled into the ER, having said goodbye to my child and said the last words that I thought it could be, I knew that in that moment, 90% of the things in my life were still good. But the resonance that came through was this: if going through this allows me to reach even one or two people that my story wouldn't have connected with, then it is more than worth it. And I guess to take it from that, as I've been asked frequently, Dan, would you change anything in your life? I say no. And for quite a while I said no. I just wish I'd hurt people less. And then somebody pointed out to me, well, that was hurt that maybe they needed to encounter to help shape them where they are. And so now I wholeheartedly say no, because anything I take away is somebody that I wouldn't be able to reach.
Wow, that's powerful. And, I asked that question in that way because that's the way that so many others challenge us to see what we encounter as. It's a gift.
I think there are opportunities. So if for you and for many others, the words opportunity and gift are very synonymous, I would say that anything we encounter in life is an opportunity, right? Is a decision that we make. What did I say earlier? The very first inflection point for me: choices create change. So it's decisions create that. I see everything that we encounter, every struggle that we encounter, as a decision. My recently announced divorce is a decision, and a decision of how I respond to that. My recently announced, as my child comes out as trans, is a decision. How do we respond to that? How do we represent that? What story does that tell? And not in some fake way, but what are we living into the world, and how will that allow us to help others? So in that sense, I would say that it could be perceived as a gift. Yes.
I love that we're having this conversation because words get married together and means so many things to different people. I had a conversation with somebody who's a triple language master.
Oof, not me. I have English and sarcasm. That's it.
And language matters. And it was
It
interesting
does.
because we came across the one topic, and school bus, the word school bus, the two words school
Mhm.
bus, do not conjure the same image for a child in another country that they do here,
Right.
because not everywhere has that little yellow
Right.
bus.
Right. Well, or you even look at regional dialects throughout the US. I love the little Facebook pictures when they'll talk about how you say y'all or you all or used guys or whatever, or you take anything, the trash can that you take outside, what do you call that? Or different holidays, a number of things are referred to so differently. And I agree that the language that we use, the specificity that we grab onto, makes a monstrous difference, and it's crucial. And having an English degree, I just assume that I have the right to create words as necessary, but I'm also passionate about their use and what they point to.
That's awesome. And maybe one of these days we can have a conversation about all these new words they're putting in the dictionary that I had no idea about, didn't even know they were words. But again,
I'm in. I look forward to it. I every year I read those lists and look at them and say, oh, they added these and they chose not to add those. Yeah, I have that debate within my family.
I really like that you talked about, response versus reaction.
Mhm.
When I was going through my therapy, which, I went through 22 years, you want to talk about a slow learner. That's what I feel like with, going through 22 years of therapy to finally get to a place where I could comfortably navigate life on my own without that level of
Right.
support.
I get that.
And I still felt incomplete. And when my therapist asked me what it was about, I said, well, I want to respond. I don't want to react. And he goes, wow. And I was just like, well, what is that? Help me get there, and because I feel like it's so important. I see today's society and I see so much reactionism.
Sure.
And I think it's a response, or it's a reaction that's going to keep people stuck for a while.
It is, and it's one that can throw up a lot of barriers.
Yeah.
Actually, if I can give a quick example, I think it'll really click home. Is I do help people a lot with this. When I was out selling, I was doing straight commission in-home selling, going to on telemarketed leads to people's houses. So someone would call you on the phone and say, he's right in the neighborhood. I'm like 100 miles away. They would say, it doesn't matter if you have any money. They would say, oh, we declared bankruptcy and we don't have any money. We don't even want a kitchen. Oh, that's fine. We just want to come do a presentation for you. And I get all of the reasons behind that, but that's what I'm walking into. And my job is to get to the end. And this is a one call close. This is many years ago, but this was a one call close, meaning if I don't sell it, I never get to talk to this person again. There is no such thing as follow up. And this was 20 years ago. So it's a little different world, but that's how it was. And it was straight commission, which means I'm driving 2,000 miles a week. I get to your house. I'm thinking I got to sell something or I don't eat. Right. So I go in, I do this beautiful presentation. I ask you questions. I find out what's important to you. I make this great connection. I go through and I do this amazing presentation. And I get to the end and I look across the table and I say, great, this can be taken advantage of in one or two ways, 25% down, balance on your satisfactory completion, or one of our convenient finance options for investments as low as $167 a month. Can you tell I may have memorized that 25 years ago? And I would say that, and then I would pause. Right, that was that. Like which makes the most sense for you, and I would pause. And of course, my heart's all just going, and I'm all emotional because I'm like, oh, I'm gonna eat. I made a good presentation. They want it, and they would look at me and they would say, well, Dan, that looks great, but we want to think about it. And my instinct, and what I did for my first several months, my instinct would be to like lean over the table and go, what do you want to think about? Like, I mean, like, like it would be this whole thing, right? Because that is reaction. That is, I need to eat. How do you not see this was a great presentation? What I taught myself and I teach others is to use what I call a device that you insert something in the middle to pause, to get your brain to the second and a half it needs to engage. And I taught myself in that case, I've done some other things since, but I taught myself in that case to every time they said something before I could say a word, I would cross my leg and sit back. All it did is force me to take in one breath. It gave me 1 second, about 1.5, really. And it's interesting that 1.5 seconds, my brain would engage. I would get out, like it would let the emotion flow through and go away, like woo, bye-bye. And then my brain would engage. And instead of what I would have said before, now I would say, wow, I can certainly appreciate that.
Wow.
Let me see if I understand. And now I'm calm and I'm asking questions and I'm talking and I'm trying to figure out like what's going on and what there is. And a lot of times it would be 3-4 minutes later and we'd be writing a deal. Yeah. All because I learned how to step out of the emotion or let it flow into the ether and get into the response rather than the reaction.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. That's a good thing to think about. So what is one thing, since we're coming up on the end of the time together here today, what is one thing you would tell your 18-year-old self?
Well, to be fair, my 18-year-old self probably wouldn't have listened to a damn thing. My book is titled "The Unintentional Asshole" for a reason. That is who I was, and it's titled that because I believe that every single time you see ego or arrogance, it is covering insecurity, and it's almost always in direct proportion to it. And so I had a massive ego that needed its own hotel room, which means I had an insecurity that needed its own hotel, and I was covering everything with ego, and I was able by sheer force of will to move forward. So I don't know that I would have actually heard anything, but if I could have gotten a message through, man, there are 20 I'd love to give, right? Dreams are real. There's always light through the darkness. Don't connect with this person. What I could give all of those, but I think the one that probably would have allowed me to flow through more smoothly is live in eagerness, learn to live in eagerness rather than impatience. I believe that impatience is inward and downward. It's about entitlement. It's about I deserve. It's about checking the box and getting to the destination. And most of us live in there for much of our lives. I did. Mm-hmm. It was written up when I got critique in my jobs and all of that. I would be like, you need to be more patient. And the problem is the answer isn't be more patient. And that's the answer that we give. That is not the answer. That's BS. That's ridiculous because sure. Wow. I wish I'd thought of that. Like, that's great. The answer is, as it is with so many other things, what is the replacement? Right. And the replacement is eagerness. And eagerness is upward and outward. Eagerness is about learning and earning. Eagerness is about the journey. Eagerness is about being present rather than wishful for the future or wistful for the past. It's about getting to that space. And so it would either have to be that or my number one core belief in the world. People matter most and relationships are everything.
Wow. That's fantastic. And yes, I agree with you. The first time that I was asked that question, the first thing I thought is, well, I wouldn't have listened.
Right.
Not at that age.
I mean, most of us would, right? When I was 18, like most 18-year-olds, I thought I knew 100% of everything in the world. Now, every year I get older, it's like I realize how much less I knew, which is weird because I learn more every year, but I understand how much less I know. And that's it keeps me in a space of learning every day and moving forward in growth and all of that. But boy, could I have used a dose of that about 30 years ago.
Yes. Yes. I had a lot of advice. I got married when I was 18. So I had a lot of advice that was given to me.
Mm-hmm.
And of course I was like, don't worry about it. I got
They don't
this.
know what they're talking about. Yeah, I got this.
I
You
got
don't. You
this.
don't see the picture, people. I know it from the inside. Yeah. Oh, oh, I'm there. I'm so there. I told my wife on our second date that I was going to marry her. So
Well, I can honestly and with a smile on my face admit to those folks that have since passed on, they were right.
oh, see, good for you. I'm more like the old Happy Days episodes with Fonzie, where I'll say, "Oh, you were right, and I was right. I was less right." Like that's about as far as I'm joking, of course,
Yeah,
but it is something where when we go back and we see that, what do you know? Time, objectivity gives us perspective. Who knew?
yes, yes. So please share, you know, your business again and how people can reach out and connect with you.
Thank you so much for that. My business is Leaders Must Lead, and you'll find me almost everywhere under either my name, Dan McPherson, or under Leaders Must Lead, or under Dreams Are Real. The best way to connect with me is probably that last one. It's either to message me on Facebook at my name, that's fine. But the best way to connect with me longer term, join the Dreams Are Real community on Facebook and check out the Dreams Are Real podcast, and you'll hear amazing stories and connect with lots of fun stuff around the world. I'm always glad to help from a coaching standpoint or share our online platform or do all of those things. But mainly my goal is to help you understand how to find your calm, look for and find the clear next steps in your life so that you can step through the darkness and achieve your dreams.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you very much for being here with me today and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. I love that you're sharing this platform, and I love your heart and what you're moving into in the world. And congratulations for jumping off the cliff in so many different ways and doing the damn thing. Nice work. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Transformational Art with Katana. If you enjoyed the show, please click the like button and share the link to this podcast with your family and friends. To connect with me personally, please send an email to transformationalartwithkatana@gmail.com. Have a beautiful day.